Hello, everyone. Welcome to Manomet's third webinar in our small sit virtual series called Amazon Shorebird Workshop Discoveries, presented by Manomet's Managing Director Flywise, Dr. Juliana DeBosi Almeida, and Senior Shorebird Conservation Specialist Arnie Lesterhouse. I'm Gina Rourke, Manomet's Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. I'm going to be your MC today. If you're new to Manomet, a little background on our organization. We use science and collaboration to reverse shorebird decline, promote coastal resiliency, and educate and inspire the next generation of conservationists across the Western Hemisphere. And if you're a friend, volunteer, trustee, or donor to Manomet already, then thank you. It is only with your support that we can continue to get our boots muddy, in this case, very muddy in the Amazon, and you'll see, doing hands-on science in collaboration with local partners. And just a couple of housekeeping notes for today's webinar. We have quite a few folks on the webinar. I think it's close to 80 or more. And I'd love for attendees to put in the chat where you're zooming in from today. We can kind of see the panoply of people coming across the airways, webways. People are zooming in from all over. And then after that, we're going to reserve the chat for comments or any tech issues you might be having. And we do welcome your curiosity. And so any questions you have for the presenters, if you can include them, type them into the Q&A box, and Juliana and Arnie will be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation as time allows. And now, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Manomet's Dr. Juliana DeBosi Almeida. The floor is yours, Juliana.
Hi, Jean. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. Let me share my screen. Here we are. So, are you guys? I don't have anyone on my screen, so please, Jean, are you seeing my presentation mode?
Yep, you're good.
Thank you.
Perfect.
So, Arnie and I are going to talk today about shorebirds in the Amazon, which is quite unusual, as usually when we talk about shorebirds, this is what comes to people's mind. Beautiful, exquisite, colorful birds that use the forest habitat in the region. However, we've known for a long time that shorebirds that go from North America to South America do have to migrate over the Amazon. And so that we can promote conservation for shorebirds across the hemispheres, we need to ensure that they have habitat all throughout their life cycle. So breeding in North America, migrating to South America, southern cone sometimes. Birds fly over the Amazon over here. So there are conservation strategies that deal with this difficulty in aligning conservation across countries for so many different sites throughout the flyway, throughout the life cycle of a species. Some of them concentrate on the Atlantic, Pacific, and we have one that is in process of being built, that is the Mid-Continent Shorebird Conservation Initiative. While we were putting it together in workshops across with people across the Americas, it was painfully obvious to us how little we know about how shorebirds use the Amazon. And so, even though we knew from a while back that shorebirds were using the Amazon from observational data, is it there? Is it not there? When it's there? And we're able to construct highways, paths, so that we thought were the paths that shorebirds used to go, for example, across Brazil here, and then through the Amazon. We did not know how they use that, where they are, and how long they stay. Just recently, with all the technology that has been developed with tags and GPS, we're being able to gather more information. So here in green, the lines, you can see tracks of birds that have carried tags on their backs when they're flying either south or northward. And the dots represent places they stopped. So the technology now allows us not only to see the way they go, but also if they stop and how long they stop for. And with that, we're beginning to see that birds are using the Amazon. They're not just flying by. They're stopping and resting and feeding to gain energy to continue their path southward or northward. However, these sample sizes that we have for birds that are tagged are very, very small compared to the number of birds that actually fly over the Amazon or fly through and use the Amazon. So we need more information locally to understand exactly where the birds are, what is it that they're facing, and how do we go about protecting those areas they need. So where do we want to go? What is the direction that we took when trying to start bridging this gap? You guys are going to see throughout the talk how big the gap is and how big the challenge is, both in terms of quantity of information as well as in area to cover. So our main goals when embracing this project was to identify the habitats that birds are using within the Amazon basin. So what habitats for which species? Where are these habitats? How do we find them? This is all very important so that we can direct people to go count and look for shorebirds or accompany their stay while they're there. So identifying habitats, and then to build a protocol in which we can gather scientific data that is comparable across the basin, across the countries, and the habitats. We need to gather preliminary data and test if they're going to work or not. Only after all this, we can start thinking of scaling up and understand the real number of birds. What's the population of birds that use the Amazon basin during migration? And that brings up, how do we scale this up? Because as you will see, we will not be able to survey all the Amazon basin. And how do we understand how many birds are being counted, how many birds are there but are not being counted, the detection probability, so that we can come up with a scientific number telling us what is the population of shorebirds using the Amazon. And towards the end of that, but especially after we're able to get an estimate of where the birds are, how many birds and where they are, is that we're going to be able to actually start implementing actions for conservation of those habitats to make sure that these birds can continue to fly across the Amazon for many, many years. So this is just a illustration of how big an area the challenge is. Here on the left, you have the Amazon basin, more or less a rough polygon for the Amazon basin in South America, which has an area of about 7.5 million square kilometers. The continental US has about 8 million, little over 8 million square kilometers. So if you think of the effort we have to make to estimate shorebird populations, would be about the effort we'd have to estimate population of shorebirds in the US, in the continental US, a little under that. So the area is huge. It's forested. There aren't highways, no internet. I guess now there's some internet, but there's still it's still a huge effort to have people all over the area to be able to count birds. So we have to find ways to count them without necessarily going every single place in the Amazon. Still, to do that, 7.5 million square kilometers, we need collaboration, and we started the project with building these partnerships in Brazil last year, September of last year. And we had a terrific crew board a boat in the Brazilian Amazon. And we had people from 4 different countries, Brazil, US, Peru, and Colombia. And many different organizations, as you can see under each of those countries. And that was possible because of the grants we were able to get and from the Forest Service and Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Act through Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as support from Manomet. In addition to that, there were also other areas of the Amazon that were surveyed by partners, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia, by our partners here. And these are all the rivers that were surveyed by this effort that we had last year. Rio Amazonas, Mamoré, Madre de Dios, Amazon River, which is just the Rio Amazonas, and then the Amazon River in Peru, Rio Naipo, and Rio Guaviare. Arnie is now going to join and tell you all how we did what we did.
Yeah, thank you, Juliana. Am I in view? I only see you.
Yes,
so
we can see you.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for this first part of the presentation. As you could see on the map, it's a huge area to survey. So really one of the biggest challenges or questions also that we had is like how do you survey such a big area? What habitat do you focus on within the area that you want to focus on, and how do you even start counting that? So there were quite some questions in the air to how to approach this, and already in the last, no, that's already 2 years ago, in September 2022, there was a preliminary gathering of some experts in Peru, which was supported by US Forest Service, and where a couple of NGOs and from different countries all went to Peru and did some surveys and checking out the habitat in Peru and started some preliminary discussions about okay how would we approach this, and then later in last year in Brazil, when we had this great team there, we actually continued those discussions on the boat, because already on day one, I think we went out and we had 3 boats. We had this one big boat, which you saw earlier in the presentation, which had this great room inside where we could meet up. And we actually sat down after day one during the first day, we went out in small boats all together, and then we realized well, we have to think about this to actually make the most of the time that we have and all the experts that we have on board. So we had these discussion sessions and talked about how to best approach and make best use of the next, what was it, 10 days that we were all together here trying to figure out what to do. And working together like that is of course well, to me, it was very, very inspiring. I mean, having all these experts there and talking together, these bright minds to get to a way of how to approach. Next one, please, Juliana. So the survey approach was more or less focusing on three steps, you can say, more or less. I mean, we had to look into mapping the area. I mean, to get an idea of where we want to go. We were thinking about the surveys, talking about the surveys. I mean, how do we actually do the work in the field? And when we get off the big boat, and how do we then collect the data? And the first part, the mapping, which had people like Matt at Ryder of Point Blue really helped out a lot, also together with Jenny, to figure out how to identify habitat that's suitable to survey. Because if you're on a boat there and you just cruise along the coast, you will find all types of habitat, and then will you focus on everything, or where will you focus on? So Matt was practicing a little bit and checking out like what options are there, and then using Google Earth Engine, he actually was able to look at the month more or less where we were, and then create some maps that showed more or less where water just receded, or where mud or sandbanks just appeared, but also existing sandbanks, if they were still, of how long were they already bare, and whether they had already vegetation. So it provided us with some maps which were so much more useful than just Google Earth, for example, where you don't know from when it is. So that was a great first step to actually start orientating us on where to focus on. And then, of course, getting off the big boat, if we want to do the surveys and actually get into the field, instead of all going on these 3 boats all together, of course, we all separated in 3 groups, having experts on all boats, and actually survey. Each group would survey a pre-selected area that we selected from the maps that were then created priorly on the boat, and then people would go and visit those pre-selected areas that looked potentially good for shorebirds. And then we're talking about areas that are above water and not deep water areas. And we did those surveys then in the morning and in the afternoon. And then during the siesta time, it wasn't really, not that we really were doing siesta or something, of course. I mean, it was full-time working, of course. But then between those times, we would move the big boat and we would relocate to different areas, and then to survey different areas in the afternoon. This was also because of the heat. I mean, during the middle of the day, it's just too hot to be out there. So that's also something good to keep in mind when you do these kind of surveys, that you focus on the early morning and the late afternoon, or not late, just mid afternoon. And then, well, the actual data collection, I mean, what will we be gathering in terms of data? Well, first of all, we decided that there is quite a diversity in habitat types, which also has different birds on different types of habitats. So the best way to keep that to some extent separate is to survey and transect along transect per habitat type. So we really focus on stretches of the river, where one group would go, and if a sandbank turned into like a mud flat or whatever, then we would change that into a different transect. We would record these tracks, these transects with GPS, but also using eBird to track the transect. But we also would go off the boat to walk habitats, but also to take GPS points of specific types of habitats in order to ground truth later with the map. So that's what we did also when we did data collection. And all the data were, each transect was like an eBird list that we would then upload to eBird. But it was not just eBird; it was eBird and GPS that every boat had to have to track all the transects and the habitat types, etc., etc. And yeah, next is an example of the map. Julian, if you can move to the next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So this is just an example of the maps that Matt created using mostly the Google Earth Engine. And here you can see that areas that were highlighted in dark green, blue, and bright blue, that were places that changed, that had recently changed. And in the case of the river that was receding, that was going down, we then understood that those areas were either sandbanks, or they would be mud flats, or any shallow water area. So if we would go out and do the surveys, we would separate in groups focusing on these types of habitats. So sending people to different parts of the river. This is an example from Peru, by the way, but maps in all the other countries and also in the Amazon where we were in Brazil were similar to this, and it really helped us to focus on those areas that are most likely suitable for shorebirds. And again, knowing the size of the area, and I mean that's important to do, because otherwise you could like spend a whole day at a whole stretch of river, which is highly unlikely suitable habitat for shorebirds. So you would really lose a lot of important time. So it was really helpful to get this kind of information while we were on the boat. Next, please. Just an example has some pictures of the variety of types of habitat that we encountered. You had these open mud flats with very open terrain, no vegetation. Then you had these smaller rivers that would go into that would split off from the main Amazon River and go into the forest, which had some shallow water, and it has some coast where you could see some shorebirds like that, like the spotted sandpiper, for example, would rather be in those kind of areas. And then you had open sandbanks. There were sandbanks with vegetation. So the picture on the right, bottom right, where you see the green grass, that's actually a huge sandbank or island in the middle of the river, which, well, even has some trees on it, but it had like these grassy areas and then even a little stream going through it again. You had populated coastlines where a lot of houses or floating houses, and even some lagoons. Like the photo in the middle, bottom middle is that one. That's actually like a lagoon on like an island. So that you have a huge island, and then you have a lagoon in the middle of that island, and you had then this area was having some dead vegetation, but there were actually quite a lot of shorebirds in that kind of habitat as well. So we had all types of habitat, and all these habitats we would then count, and we do transects in these types of habitat, all separate, counted separately, and kept separately in the database. Next. So just to show a little bit some of these transects, you can here see the surveys and how we collected the data. We focus really on the types of habitat, and here on the bottom, in the top line, at the top row, you can see the transects, some example transects that we did. And then below in the top, the bottom line, you can see the corresponding habitat that was seen at those sites. So you had these little rivers that were split off from the main river, which was highly vegetated, and these very open areas, and which were then more sandbanky. So very, very diverse. But then the transect weren't set in terms of length; they were more focused on the habitat type. Yeah. Okay. Next. And yeah, it was quite hard work, good result. It was quite hard in the sense that, well, it was very hot. That's one thing. But also the habitat was so diverse that also had the surface was very different. You could have these sandbanks where you could just walk on, but then you could also have these very big, like very large muddy areas where you could hardly get off land to be able to see what's behind it. Yeah, where you could find the lagoons, for example. Mud flats are, well, you couldn't really walk on them. I mean, there was some differences there. I mean, you had part of the crew were people that were lighter than others, and then I was not on that part of the crew, so I had more issues in the mud than others, for example. But I think most of the crew staff that was there got muddy eventually, got stuck or whatever, because it was quite tricky. And then being on the boats most of the days, I mean, in bright sun, I mean, it was great, but it's quite hard, and you need to keep that in mind as well if you want to plan for this kind of work. Next, please. Well, some general results from the field. That's of course what everybody wants to hear, I guess. Here you see a couple of pictures with from the field, from the birds that we saw. I mean, resident birds, Nearctic migrants. Overall, there was 6 species of resident birds, so birds that breed in the Amazon, and 21 Nearctic migrants. You have species like Hudsonian godwits, American golden plovers, colored plover, still sandpipers as well, not a lot, northern lapwings, and overall in the whole area, and then I'm also including here those birds and those counts from Peru and Bolivia, Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador and Colombia. We had about 21,000 shorebirds in total observed, which is quite a big number. And we talk about like 10 days maybe in Brazil, and then 5 or 6 days each in the other countries. So it's quite an effort and quite some good results for this first regional approach. Okay, next. There's just some overview of the regional results from all the countries, and the numbers, well, they speak for itself. Overall, Nearctic migrants were really the largest group of birds that we saw, almost twice. Well, yeah, basically twice as much as resident species. Also interesting to just look at the transects that we did. So we had almost 300 transects were carried out in the field, and that was overall about 1,000 kilometers of surveys along transects that we carried out to get to this data. The Brazil, I must say that the Brazil data was from late September, whereas most of the data from the other 4 countries was from October. Yes, so that's during migration that can show some differences, of course, because you have these peaks of birds coming and going. But most birds, a lot of birds were seen in Bolivia, specifically along the rivers there. It's something to keep in mind also for future efforts. Next. Just highlighting some examples. Some of the focal species were buff-breasted sandpiper and American golden plover, which are the birds that are quite known for being interior migrants. If you see a lot of the buff-breasted sandpipers, which is the first row in the table, were seen in Peru. There were really a lot of them were seen there, and also in Bolivia, the number was pretty high. And then if you then look at the American golden plover at the bottom row, we really had a lot of those in Brazil, a lot of rather big flocks, and less in Peru and Bolivia. And if you remember, next slide, please. If you remember also what Juliana mentioned in the beginning, is how we now know more thanks to tracking about how birds migrate, also how they migrate through the Amazon. Then actually our data shows pretty well also that pattern. I mean, the American golden plover on the right map, all the birds that were tracked show up on the eastern side of the Amazon over Brazil, whereas the buff-breasted sandpiper really is a bird that migrates more on the western side. So you would expect numbers to be higher in those countries, and that's actually what we see here. This buff-breasted being much more common in Peru and Bolivia, whereas the American golden plover is more commonly recorded during this survey, this study in Brazil. Next. And then 2 other species that, well, they're also very known for being interior shorebirds and interior migrants, and these were one of the top birds actually in terms of numbers. And actually Bolivia was really a hotspot for these both birds. So the top row in the table is white rump sandpiper, and then the bottom row is petrel sandpiper. And they more or less have similar numbers if you look at the total numbers that were observed. In Brazil, we saw quite a number of these as well, but not reaching quite the number of Bolivia. And in Peru also, petrel sandpiper was quite common. But both these species are very, very common interior migrants, and well, the numbers show that they were very, very common among all the species. And next. And then just to quickly look at some of the more of the resident species. We have the pied plover and the collared plover. Both species are tied to sandbanks and riverbanks, and they specifically like the sandy beaches and sandy areas in the Amazon. We in Brazil did not see a lot of those. There was only one record actually, so that's definitely not a lot. And then in Peru there were very few, but in Bolivia this was a really common species, which was seen in well, relatively well, loose small flocks on the sandbanks there. Whereas colored plover is much more common and much more spread out in the area, and had quite a high number. And these are numbers that weren't really known to us. I mean, pied plover specifically is a bird that is not really known to be occurring in high numbers, very spread out, and we don't really know how many there are. So this kind of surveys really help to get a better idea of how many there actually are. And there might be quite some spread out through the Amazon, specifically more in the central part toward Bolivia. And yeah, next. And then last but not least, of course, I mean, if you're so long in the Amazon or in the fields, there's always something interesting that can hop up, yeah? And we definitely had a couple of surprises, or maybe not 100% a surprise, but birds that aren't really interior birds. For example, the black bellied plover there on top left, where we had a couple of birds well, we saw in Brazil with some. I think they were only seen in Brazil actually. The couple of birds that were seen, and then the sanderling, which is the top right bird, was seen in a couple of countries as well, but only talking about individuals, not one or two birds. I mean, these are birds that are tied to the coast and not really to interior wetlands or river systems. Then the buff-breasted sandpiper there on the top, no, bottom left, it stands next to a ruddy toadstone in Bolivia. They've observed that bird. That's not really a combination that you would see very often. These birds are generally using very different habitats, so that was very interesting and surprised to find. But occasionally turnstones get somehow mixed up and go through the interior. And then in Peru there was a pair of western sandpipers, which also is strictly coastal shorebird, of course, but they found that along the Amazon River there as well, which is very interesting as well to highlight. And there were also semi-palmated plover and semi-palmated sandpiper were also seen during the service, but there were no picture of those, unfortunately. But also these birds are quite rare to see in the interior. So all these birds were quite pleasant surprises to see, but maybe to some extent you can expect if you're always a lot of people in the field looking for shorebirds. And then I think I will hand it over back to Juliana to talk a bit about the threats and why we have to focus on this habitat for shorebirds.
Thanks, Arnie. So now we're getting, I hope you're seeing me. We're getting a better idea of where the birds are, though there's still a long ways to go. We'll be able eventually to tackle better how to approach the threats that shorebirds have and will continue to have in the future. While surveying, we saw some of the threats. We saw a lot of trash in the rivers, and we saw people cultivating on the shores of the river. The cultivation in itself might not be a problem, but there were some that were using pesticides, and so the pesticides gets in the water, and that becomes a much greater issue. However, there are major changes that can come about in the Amazon basin that can be derived from hydroelectric dams. So here in yellow, this is from 2015, but it illustrates a bit, the potential of hydroelectric exploration in the Amazon basin. And the main issue here is the dams changed the normal change in water levels, and so that will change the exposure of habitat for shorebirds, which is very dependent on the dynamics of the water levels that change in the different seasons in the Amazon, like many meters. So hydroelectric dams can affect the sandbanks that shorebirds are using in the mudflats. Another one that is becoming more evident, I don't know how many of you have seen, but last year there was an announcement of the Brazilian government for oil exploration drilling in the Amazon basin. And in addition to these, there are others on the shore and further south, but these were the ones that were being discussed about. I don't know how the term is in English, but to open for the companies that are interested in exploring. And so here you can see Manaus. This is where we launched our boat from. And this is exactly the region where we were counting shorebirds. The other maps that you saw with tracks had birds here and here. So from this, we can, and the little we already discovered from the shorebirds use of habitat in the Amazon, we can already see that there is going to be an overlap there of the habitat they use, and depending on how the drilling goes and how that can affect. But at least now we can start looking forward to what is that we need to prepare to make sure that shorebirds continue to have habitat in the Amazon basin. So what are the next steps? There are many. I'm gonna name just a few. Though we have identified habitat and species using the Amazon, we have a better idea of how to locate them based on the GIS exploration that was done during the boat workshop that we held in the Amazon here in Brazil. There's still other steps on that modeling that needs to follow through in terms of understanding how to find those habitats depending on the year, because the variation in the water level changes depending on the year. Some years it is faster, some years it's slower, and that is going to change the availability of the habitat as well. So it's going to be a constant search. And we are hoping that we can build a model that will help us locate where that is depending on the water level of the year. There's still several steps to get there. In having that, if we have that in hands, we can actually work on putting together a feasible protocol. But we need to look for a network of sites and volunteers that can survey shorebirds in those sites. We're starting to move with that forward now, contacting local people and thinking of possible places, for example, where bird watchers go frequently. That can be a first step in assuring that we have volunteers that could do the surveys. We also have to see if those places align align with locations of habitat for shorebirds. So this is another set of steps that we need to go to be able to to build this network so that we can have a continuous and a basin-wide survey protocol in place. And from there, once we have enough people on the ground, then we understand the habitats and the availability. We can start understanding as well how many birds that are there that are not counted, so that we can scale up and understand how many birds are using the whole basin, which is also an important scientific piece of the puzzle for us to work on the conservation of shorebirds and the conservation of the Amazon basin for shorebirds. So that will also help us understand all the surveys. Where are the important areas for us to focus on conservation actions? And might lead us to nominating or finding areas that are suitable and to be part of the WISRN, or the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network. So keep tuned, because we do intend to go back to the field this fall for you guys in the north, spring for us here in the south. So around October, we should be back in the Brazilian Amazon this year, surveying for shorebirds and ground truthing the information that we collected and that has been modeled this past year. And I hope you guys will have a next episode of this talk next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Juliana and Arnie. That was incredible. Just to see all the work that gets done, really knee deep in mud in 100-degree temperatures. We do have a couple of minutes left that we can answer some questions. Why don't we, Julie Beer has a few. The shorebird numbers in Bolivia seem to be quite high. Is this because Bolivian habitat is less disturbed?
Ooh. Well, that's a good question, but it can be also related to time of when the surveys were done. During migration, you can be on the right day or on the wrong day at a specific site. So generally, time will tell how common our birds were, whether the habitat is in better shape. I would not know that at this point, because that's really need to go back for that. But next year, things can be all different. I mean, migration, it never gives you a clear answer in just 1 year. So, but it is, noteworthy that it was a good run for them.
And let's see, in general, did you find the Amazon basin to be drier and hotter than expected? Are you finding evidence of global warming?
This year, the Amazon was a record year for heat and for drought. While we were in Brazil, we got the highest rates of water drop in the river. Just if we had been later, if we were this in 2023, we went in September. If we had gone in October, we wouldn't have been able to reach the places we did, because the boat wouldn't get there. There were places that we couldn't go, that we had planned on going and couldn't go because the water level was way lower than it was supposed to be. It was so low this year that there were discoveries of, I don't know how you call it in English, but archaeological drawings or opacities. I don't know how you say opacities in English, but the water dropped so much that there were sites that they found these drawings from centuries and centuries ago that no one had ever seen. So the water in the Amazon had never dropped as much as it did this year. And if it's a global climate issue, very likely it is. But like, that's all, just like every other big change in climate. We are not studying that, so we can't certify that it is. But yeah, very
Scientists
likely.
always need the
Yes.
data. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Let's get to Tony has a question. Why were you especially looking for habitat that had undergone recent changes?
Oh, that's just to, I mean, shorebirds would select habitats that are drying up, or that is still muddy, or that's shallow water. I mean, if it's deep water, then you won't be able to find shorebirds, because it's most likely you will have like a high shore with a high water level, and you won't see the shore. You want to look for birds in those areas where water just receded, and where it is accessible to shorebirds, especially if it's still wet. That's what they would prefer, and that's probably where they then would be found. And often that was the case, not always, because we have seen great habitat. But again, if we're talking about migratory birds, I mean, maybe not today, but tomorrow it's loaded. So I mean, but it's the best habitat to look for during migration.
And when the land has been dried, for the water has receded for a long time, that habitat becomes either too dry and hard, so shorebirds can't feed on it, or it can develop grass and so it won't be as optimal as what Arnie was describing as habitat for shorebirds.
Okay, great. Let's just squeeze in one last question from Julie. Are Indigenous people active in protecting shorebird habitat from disturbances? Then we'll wrap it up.
If the indigenous,
Are Indigenous people active in protecting shorebird?
so there's the local communities and the indigenous people. I don't know exactly which one she's specifically talking about. So I'm gonna try to tackle both. And Arnie can compliment from the other countries because my knowledge is more of Brazil. And regarding to the local people, they're not very aware, like in general, of shorebirds there, because of the diversity of birds and how birds are usually in the forest and there all year round, whereas shorebirds come through during a small period of time. Usually they don't realize even that shorebirds are there and what they use. And I have reached out to friends that work with indigenous tribes, really, and they doesn't seem like shorebirds are part of their traditional knowledge. It was just a few. We have a huge number of different tribes and people, indigenous people in the Amazon. So, but once you talk to them about it, they do remember what it is and they start connecting the dots. The big thing is that because they come and disappear, they don't understand that the birds are coming from so far away. And so when you reach out to these people and tell them the story of how far the birds fly, it changes their perspective and their ability to focus on the birds and care for the birds as well.
That's great. I guess we learned that telling the story of the shorebirds becomes even more important. We are going to wrap it up here. Thank you, Juliana and Arnie, for that presentation, and to our attendees that come from West to East, California to Cape Cod, Alaska to South America. Thank you. If you'd like to learn more about Manomet, please visit our website, manomet.org, or join the conversation on our Facebook or Instagram pages and YouTube. This presentation is going to be available tomorrow for anyone if you'd like to share it. And if you enjoyed today, we'd love for you to support our work directly with a donation online if you haven't already. Stay tuned for details on next month's webinar. And if you're itching to get out and bird, we have a couple events coming up for our friends in New England, including a winter wander at Petix Island in Boston Harbor and a First Friday bird walk at Manomet headquarters in Plymouth, Mass. Check out our events page on how to register. And now we at the Small Sit are signing off. Thank you so much and goodbye. We appreciate your joining us today.